What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the 2009 mixtape by T.I. Basically, this project is called A Year and a Day, and it came out in the spring of 2009. And the thing about this particular project is this is something that T.I. dropped right before he went to prison for his 8-9 months back in 2009, as far as that kind of happened and such. This was something that was kind of a project that was kind of in between like Paper Trail and then No Mercy from late 2010. So between that time, T.I. went to prison 2 different times, but in 2009 in 2008 in 2008, T.I. made the album Paper Trail, which was kind of a change of character for him. He started to write his lyrics down and just had a lot of different odes on there. It was different from the usual trap heavy type stuff that was on like his earlier albums from the 2000s and such. And the particular kind of thing about it was T.I. was trying to change his character. And the thing about it was T.I. was trying to have a change of heart around that particular time. And Paper Trail was just kind of a more pop rap approach from what that kind of was. And from what it was, Paper Trail was kind of a more pop rap kind of approach. Definitely had some gems on there, but it was also pretty much T.I.'s biggest album at the time. Had a number of hits on there like Whatever You Like, Live Your Life, Dead and Gone, some of those type ones that just really hit quite heavily. Even Swagga Like Us was a pretty big hit around that time. So it was particularly large. So it was a particular large time for T.I. late 2008. But then in the early months of 2009, he hadn't quite gone to prison. So that's kind of the concept about it. He had enough time to make some extra projects. I want to say there might have been at least one other project that came out between September 2008's Paper Trail and May of 2009's A Year and a Day mixtape. So that's kind of the concept. But he had worked on a number of stuff. Initially, there was going to be an album called Paper Trail Case Closed, which had a couple singles on there called Hell of a Life and Don't Forget Me, which those songs are on this particular mixtape, but I don't up the score because of those songs on this particular mixtape because the versions of those songs that are on this particular mixtape are the clean versions, which is kind of a disappointment. I mean, I know why he did it because he wanted you to buy the particular album that was supposed to come out, but now the fact that that didn't really come out. I mean, Paper Trail Case Closed did come out, but it didn't have like a bunch of extra songs on there. It just really had those two new songs, and it really only came out in Europe from what I gathered. I just think that that's kind of the concept about it, but it's really too bad. It's too bad we didn't get like a rewrite of that particular mixtape, and the explicit versions could have been on this one because it would have upped the score on this particular thing. But it just is basically like some Paper Trail leftovers and snippets and things like that. This particular tunes that T.I. was kind of here and there working on throughout the early months of 2009 before he went to prison, as far as that kind of happened. Some good kind of gems as far as that kind of goes, but still, it kind of feels like a little bit truncated, a little bit kind of half baked as far as that kind of happens. I was expecting a little bit more fury from Ti around this time as far as that kind of went, because I knew that I was expecting a little bit more fury from Ti around this time, just because Paper Trail was basically like his biggest album, and that type of stuff had some of his biggest singles, and he was just overall on top of the world around that particular time. But it's just kind of, I mean, this is not a horrid mixtape, but it's just kind of subpar. I would have to say it's just not up to snuff with Ti around this. It's just not up to snuff with Ti in terms of his prime years as far as that kind of happens. It's definitely not one you want to miss, but just if you're expecting like a pure fury, something like Lil if you're expecting something of pure fury, something like Lil Wayne's Dedication 2, Dedication 3, some of those type classics as far as that kind of happens, just a sheer kind of tour de force mixtape. It's not really that. I just had to say it's just kind of half baked and a little bit soul and that type of stuff. Has the clean versions of like the singles that should have been on here, so it's kind of the concepts. But I'll go ahead and recommend the songs I recommend. So out of 14 songs, there's an intro and outro. There's 16 songs on here. There's an intro and outro, which narrows it down to 16. And then if you discount the song Still Ain't Forgave Myself, which is a classic T.I. tune from his I'm Serious album from 2001. There's really 13 songs. So out of those 14 or 13 songs, I wound up recommending to you 4 plus 4 almost songs. So the 4 songs I recommend would be Get That Money, Leaving With Me, Make You Sweat, and You're a Freak. And the 4 almost songs I recommend would be Collect Call, Done It Now, Don't Forget Me, and Hell of a Life. So the reason why Don't Forget Me and Hell of a Life are almost songs, just once again because they're the clean versions. These are really two red hot singles that probably could have done a lot of damage had T.I. really dropped that Paper Trail Case Closed album. But just as far as that kind of goes, and I guess I'll kind of talk about those real quick. Hell of a Life is kind of a darker, edgy version of Whatever You Like from the Paper Trail album. I would have to say it has soul and feels about it, but it's pretty radio ready. So it's just a real slash about this particular. Definitely should have been the explicit version on this particular album, but it's just at the time they didn't know that it wasn't going to come out. So it's kind of the concept. But Hell of a Life is a pretty marketable single. So just understand that these are some good tunes. Don't Forget Me with Mary J. Blige on the hooks, another nice one. This is an almost song. This is kind of similar to pop rap. This has some similar kind of pop rap commercial vibes to like Live Your Life from Paper Trail once again. Two tunes that T.I. emulated and just did pretty well as far as that kind of happens. Two tunes that T.I. emulated pretty well and they work pretty well as far as that kind of happens. Just would have to say it's a darker kind of tone. Don't Forget Me has a darker kind of tone, but it's a pretty super song, I would have to say. So it's just really, if these songs had not been the clean versions, I definitely would have recommended them pretty wholesomely. And these definitely would have been songs that could have bolstered this mixtape quite a bit. I just think this would have packed this mixtape full of the true sheer hits that it needed, because I feel like this is just a perfect little time to drop this mixtape right before T.I. went to prison. Just an after effect of like the extra kind of vibes that he was on in the Paper Trail times, with just kind of having like a good assortment of just like extra tunes that he was kind of working on in those 6 or 8 months in between that particular session. As far as that kind of went, it's just too bad that this didn't, the execution of it was just not better. But they are on here if you can tolerate the clean version of them being on here. So it's kind of the concept. But then the third Almost song is Done It Now. And this is kind of another disappointment. This has Lil Wayne on here, and Lil Wayne completely eviscerates this song, as does T.I. But it's just kind of, I really did not like the beat at all. It's pretty much one of the worst beats I've heard for T.I. and Lil Wayne. This is one of the worst T.I. and Lil Wayne beats I've heard them on as far as that kind of happens. But this is basically like a late day kind of summer ride out tune. I would have to say this song has some great snare and lyrics, but once again, the production is just pretty poor. So it's just kind of a poor concept. It's trying to be like a riveting kind of ride out type tune, just something with like pretty riffy kind of guitar type stuff as far as it kind of happens, but it just didn't really nail it quite as well. It just kind of feels like a poor rendition of it. I mean, it's kind of a summer tune. Maybe it can be like a decent ride out tune, but I just really couldn't vibe with it as wholesomely as like I was liking to. So it's kind of the concept. But that's the thing about most of this mixtape, just to be able to say that. To talk about the 4 songs I recommend on here, like You're a Freak is a really nice one. This is a Roger Troutman like club hopper. I would have to say it's a nice. You're a Freak is a Roger Troutman like club hopper. I would have to say it's a nice marinating in a nightclub kind of vibes that this song particularly kind of has, and it's just an overall hot song. This is just a nice kind of auto tune like song that just works pretty well. It's just older school. It's more 90s auto tune type feels as far as that kind of happened before T-Pain and Future and some of those type folks. It really feels like something that Tupac would have done back in the day, and by that I mean like in the 90s. This one's a definite nice club hopper. It's kind of an unfinished type song, but it's pretty good for what it is. Just a good basic kind of undercooked one, but it just hits pretty heavily as far as like one I would still recommend. It's just a nice mixtape cut as far as that kind of goes. Get That Money is another nice one. This is basically like a steady money making cut. I would have to say it's a hopping kind of club snap of a song, definitely. It's just an easy vanilla outing night song. This one's just an easy vanilla outing night song, I would have to say. So it's just a good one to kind of have, just being out and about, just kind of being out in the nightclub as far as that kind of goes, kicking back, just having some good drinks in your system, some stuff like that, some beers, some brews, some stuff like that, some hard liquor, whatever, that type of stuff as far as that kind of happens. It's a real nice one. And then Leaving With Me, this is kind of a short song. I like that Chris Brown was on the hook. It's pretty good to kind of get that. But this one's basically like a basic kind of out on the town quickie. I would have to say it's a Traverse cut, and it's just a breezy evening out kind of fare. This is just one to kind of cruise around in like the evening wind as far as that kind of happens. Just a slow creep as far as that kind of goes. Flirting with some ladies, that type of stuff. Just a good basic kind of tune. I just feel like this one is just a nice bop for kind of some summery and spring type evening fare as far as that kind of happens. Just a nice one. And then Make You Sweat. And then Make You Sweat's kind of a snazzy, paced bubbler. I would have to say it's a good on the go tune, definitely, and it's a hype dance club. This is a good on the go tune, and it's a hype kind of dance club blazer. I would have to say this is probably one of the mixtape's best beats overall. This is just a very snappy one, just a paced type one to really get the rump shaking as far as that kind of happens. Just get some girls dancing, some of that type of stuff. Just a real nice paced one to kind of have for like a hype dance club night. It's really too bad that there weren't more songs like this on the particular mixtape. Definitely need another kind of thumper like this one as far as that kind of happened. I definitely like the concept of T.I. having some dance club songs on here. This is one that's not quite undercooked and that type of stuff. This is just one that kind of feels like a full kind of fleshed out mixtape cut. That this mixtape definitely needed way more songs like this. It's just an easy kind of highlight, one of the best songs on the mixtape, I'd have to say. So it just kind of happens to be a thing. But yeah, there are some moments to kind of talk about on this particular project, but it's just kind of here and there. There's just some bunk kind of songs on here. Like I feel like All G is just kind of a retread of like a worse retread of like Ready for Whatever off of Paper Trail. I feel like Ready for Whatever is just a far better beat and just a better amalgamation of kind of doing that. And then Collect Call, to talk about Collect Call, that is an Almost song. The reason for that, that's a good song, great hook on there, all stuff like that. Just a real kind of ruminating type tune from T.I. as far as him being down and out as far as that kind of happens. But it's just on the Paper Trail Deluxe. So if you get that deluxe edition of Paper Trail, you can basically find that song. And I would just recommend getting the Paper Trail Deluxe. But it is a great song. It's another good highlight to kind of recommend. And then like At It All Night, this one kind of sampled like a Vanessa Carlton song. It was kind of a fancy and elegant type song, but it just didn't pull off the vibes. It was trying to be like a nightclub song as far as like some night out kind of flash, just kind of some vivid nights at a nightclub, but it just didn't pull it off quite as well. I just don't feel like that's a good kind of sample to kind of have for like a vivid kind of night out. It just didn't really match up with that. And then I Do is kind of a poor one. Some of these type ones were just, I mean, there just were some poor productions on here that just felt really odd and kind of like awkward for Ti to kind of have. I definitely felt like some of his After Hours. I definitely felt like some of his Afterthought type vibes when he was still on his Paper Trail kick and stuff like that definitely should have been more heavy hitting than it was. It was just kind of a disappointment that the stuff he was working on in early 2009 or maybe late 2008 just didn't hit heavier. Show Off was kind of a poor one. That was a waste of a Young Dro verse. I like Ti and Young. I definitely like Ti and Young Dro team ups, but this was just a pretty poor one that just didn't really have any compellingness whatsoever. That's kind of the problem. On Top of the World with Kanye West on there was just not quite as good of one. I feel like I mean, that song is kind of okay, but this one didn't do much to really enhance it. I mean, Kanye had a pretty good verse, but it's just kind of the same song as far as that kind of went. And they're just for kind of some poor ones on here. It just didn't really amalgamate, like I was saying, just didn't really amalgamate the concept of like leftover paper trail cuts from Ti and just the stuff that he should have been working on in 2009. I mean, maybe his morale was pretty shot because he was going to prison and stuff. I just look after it. It was just kind of a disappointment that there weren't more heavy hitting tunes like Make You Sweat and You're a Freak and some of those type ones. Get That Money. And like I definitely think the beat on Done It Now should have been a lot better. It's just some kind of concepts as far as that kind of happens, and they should have had the explicit versions of the Paper Trail Case Closed singles as far as that kind of goes. But to talk about this, as far as what I'm going to score this album or this mixtape, so me basically recommending 4 songs out of 14 on this particular mixtape, plus 4 almost songs, which are kind of to be found elsewhere. You can actually purchase like the Paper Trail Case Closed with the explicit versions, and then Collect Calls on Paper Trail Deluxe. I just would have to say I'm going to go ahead and give this mixtape like a 3.5 out of 10. That's really about all the more I can do with it because there's really only about 5 songs or so that I full blown recommend that you can't find elsewhere. Just about to say it's a pretty poor rendition, not really much highly to speak of. I mean, the tunes that are good are pretty good. I do feel like it has like a small spark of what Ti could have done with this, but it just doesn't really convey it properly. And I would say the social score, though, I'm going to give the social score like a 5 out of 10. I feel like there's some social bops on here, enough good cadence as far as that kind of happens. I do think at least Ti has some social stepping out. If you do want to get these songs off of Paper Trail Case Closed, they are on like an actual album that you can find. You can buy them digitally, of course. So they're good songs, good conduit to kind of find some stuff just around that time. It's just kind of a disappointment that these times were not more interesting considering what Ti was in his prime around this time. That's kind of the concept. So 5 social. In terms of the future, like Ti has once again, he's in terms of the future, like Ti is supposedly retiring. Hopefully he doesn't, but we've got plenty more to review. There's plenty more of these albums I'm going to get to, like King and Paper Trail and some of those type ones. There's definitely more Ti projects, including mixtapes I'm going to get to. This is not something you want to skip over, but just don't have much expectations for it because it's just not like a full blown sheer project as far as that kind of goes. But there are some gems on here.